The date is July 16, 1054. Cardinal Humbert, representing the Catholic Church delegation, enters the Hagia Sophia Church and leaves a document in front of the Patriarch of Constantinople Michael, who was preparing for the ceremony. And he leaves first Hagia Sophia and then Constantinople and returns to Rome. This document, which Humbert left in front of Patriarch Michael, declared that the Patriarch had been excommunicated by the Roman Archbishop, that is the Pope. On the same day, the Patriarch convened a church council and excommunicated those who disapproved him. Thus, July 16, 1054 was recorded as the date when the Western and Eastern churches were officially separated from each other. This separation, which historians called a Great Schism or the East-West church split, was not something that happened suddenly. The roots of the series of events that caused the separation of the two churches actually date back hundreds of years. One of the main issues of debate among Christian clergy during the Middle Ages was about which church had universal supremacy. The Roman archbishops, that is the popes, argued that the superiority belonged to the Western Church. Because Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, came to Rome, he founded a church here and was martyred here. According to the Holy See, Peter was the first Roman archbishop. Those who came after him were sitting in the papal office representing him. Jesus himself pointed to Peter as the founder of the church. In addition, Paul, who made great efforts to spread Christianity, came to Rome and was martyred there just like Peter. According to the Western churches, claim the bones of both of them were buried under a church in the Vatican. In other words, the Roman Church was rising above the two greatest martyrs of Christianity. According to the Holy See, all this was a sign of the universal superiority of the Roman Archdiocese. On the other hand, the Eastern Church explained its superiority with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was the capital of the empire and the residence of the emperor. In pre-Christian Roman religion, emperors were considered the heads of religious authority. This tradition continued after the capital of the empire was moved to Constantinople in the 4th century AD. In other words, emperors such as Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinianus had authority in religious matters. In fact, for the Eastern Church, the matter was quite simple. According to them, wherever the emperor is the church, there must be superior to all other churches. This conflict for supremacy, which continued throughout the Middle Ages, played an important role in driving a wedge between the Eastern and Western churches. The issue here wasn't really about whose reasons were more reasonable. Both churches wanted to have power over other churches. From what we have told so far, the reason for the conflict seems to be political rather than religious. But there was also a cultural dimension. By 1054, there were some fundamental differences between the two churches that had existed for many years. Although some of these may seem simple, they would somehow play a role in the division over time. For example, in the Eastern Church, it had become a tradition for clergy to grow beards. In contrast, there was no such tradition in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, clergy could marry, but in the Western Church they could not. Practices during some rituals differed. The Western Church had a more dogmatic structure. What the Pope said could not be questioned under any circumstances. On the other hand, the Orthodox believed that the Patriarch was also a human being and could make mistakes. Besides all this, the biggest problem between the two churches was the language. When the Roman Empire was divided in two in 395, the borders formed were not only political but also cultural. While Latin culture was dominant in the West, Greek culture was dominant in the East. The official language used by the Western Church was Latin, whereas the valid language in the Eastern Church was Greek. Even the emperors abandoned Latin and started speaking and corresponding in Greek from the 5th century onwards. Over time, language became a big problem between the two churches because they were not aware of their discussions in the field of theology. For example, a letter sent from Constantinople in the 5th century remained unanswered for months, because there was no one in Rome to translate it. The same was true for Constantinople. The letters sent from Rome were despised because they were in Latin and were not considered worthy of translation. By the 9th century, some clergy in the Eastern Church claimed that the Pope spoke the language of the barbarians, and that he should never establish authority over Constantinople. Another topic of discussion was about the belief in the Trinity, that is, the formula of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors held a series of councils to reach consensus on religiously controversial issues. Councils were meetings where senior clergy gathered in one place and discussed religious issues. The first of these was organized in Nicaea by Emperor Constantine in 325. The formula of the belief in the Trinity was clarified at the Council of Constantinople held in 381. Accordingly, the Holy Spirit came from the Father, that is God. However, the Western Church changed this at the Toledo Council held in 589 and accepted that the Holy Spirit came from the Father, and the Son, that is Jesus. The reason they did this was to increase the importance attributed to Jesus. Thus they would protect Jesus from heretical views. This did not cause a problem between the two churches at first, because the Eastern Church became aware of this decision years later due to the language problem we just mentioned. However, when they were informed, their attitude was clear to them: this was a heresy. Historians call this problem the filioque issue. The Latin word means "and from the Son." In the early periods of Christianity, there was no hierarchy among churches. The relationship between them was generally at the level of giving and receiving information. However, with the decisions taken at the general councils, 5 churches were deemed superior to the others and gained certain powers over the churches in their regions. These are respectively for the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Eastern clergy called this system pentarchy, that is, 5-party rule. In the early years of the pentarchy, the Roman archdiocese was considered to have priority over other archdioceses. But over time, the emperors began to attract other regional patriarchs to their side in order to increase the importance of Constantinople and have more religious authority. This inevitably deepened the divide between East and West. In the early years, popes had to submit to the political power of the emperors. In fact, in order to become pope, the support of the emperor was required. This situation continued for several centuries. In 726 AD, Eastern Roman Emperor III Leo banned the worship of images and icons of Jesus and the saints. This practice, called iconoclasm, was initiated by Pope Paul III. Gregory strongly objected, and he penned a letter declaring that he was ousting everyone involved in this movement. However, this letter never reached Constantinople because the messengers were arrested in eastern Roman Sicily. In 751, the Lombards began to threaten Rome by capturing several cities in northern Italy, leading to the opening of a new page in the history of the Catholic Church. The Pope requested help from the Frankish king Pepin the Short against the Lombards. Pepin, a religious man, gladly accepted this call and entered Italy with his army and defeated the Lombards. Pepin's generosity was not limited to this. He announced that he donated the lands extending from Rome to Ravenna to the papacy. Thus, in addition to being the only religious authority in the West, the Pope also became the king of a state located in central Italy. This was a turning point in Christian history. The process continued in 800 when Pepin's son Charlemagne was declared emperor by the Pope. In the same years, a woman, Empress Irene, was sitting on the Eastern Roman throne. The widely accepted understanding was that the emperor should be male. With the coronation of Charlemagne, the emperor now resided in the West. Theoretically, superiority had passed to the West, although Irene was dethroned in 802 and Nikephoros was declared emperor in her place. Neither the papacy nor the Franks agreed to give up their rights to the imperial title. This situation naturally led to a further deepening of the separation. However, the event that caused the ropes to break would occur shortly after the Normans conquered southern Italy. Before the Normans, most of southern Italy was under Eastern Roman rule. Starting from the 11th century, these regions gradually fell into the hands of the Normans affiliated with the Catholic Church. But there was a problem. The churches here continued to implement their ceremonies according to the principles determined by the East. In 1053, the Pope issued an edict making it mandatory for these churches to switch to Latin rites. Otherwise, they would all be closed. This decision was met with anger in the East, and in retaliation, the Patriarch declared that all Latin churches in Constantinople would be closed. The dispute between the two churches suddenly changed its dimension and turned into a diplomatic crisis. In order to find a middle way on this issue, the Pope sent a delegation led by French Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople in June 1054. The negotiations between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael had a negative course from the moment they first began. Humbert had given Michael a letter advising him to submit to papal authority. In addition, the cardinal's condescending attitude towards the Patriarch during the negotiations disturbed Michael greatly. After this, Michael did not receive the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinals remained in Constantinople for a few more weeks. Finally, enraged by the treatment he received, Humbert entered Hagia Sophia on the morning of July 16th, and left the excommunication document sealed by the Pope on the altar in front of the Patriarch. This was the last straw. Patriarch Michael, with the support of the Emperor, excommunicated first Cardinal Humbert, and then the delegation that came with him. With this decision, the Eastern and Western churches were now completely separated from each other. At first, the public was not very impressed by this situation. Western and Eastern Christians maintained good relations in the regions where they lived together. But over time, the tension between the churches caused a rift between them. With the Crusades, disagreements between peoples began to intensify, and this conflict reached its peak in 1204, when the Latins captured Constantinople. Negotiations between the churches over the years to reach a compromise were mostly inconclusive. This problem between the Eastern and Western churches has not been resolved even today, and it does not look like it will be resolved for many years. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more such videos.